For the longest time, I felt like I had a total and complete handle on who Hisoka Moro was. His characterization, his role as part antagonist, part jester, part flexible narrative counterweight, his dynamics, his psychology. While Hunter x Hunter is rife with complexity and layers in its cast, Hisoka was the one central character that I felt I could be safe in thinking that I always had a handle on. That no matter what happened, Hisoka would always be the fantastic yet simple, pleasure-seeking psycho-magician. One with richness and tons of discussion points, of course, but nonetheless one who I felt like I would always be able to fully understand and not need to get lost in the nuances of. Well, that reality is well and truly gone. Because with the release of the latest developments in the Succession War, Togashi has gone and added a hefty layer of extra meaning and honestly confounding complexity to Hisoka. He's provided elements to the character that add an unbelievable amount of depth and recontextualization. He's further enriched one of the best dynamics in the series in Chrollo and Hisoka, and overall he's just made me think of Hisoka in a totally different way. So for the first time in years and years, let's talk about him. For the vast majority of the series, it goes without saying that Hisoka is characterized by his horny hedonism and how it applies to combat. He is a character defined by the pleasure that he gets from fighting people, though not just anyone, specifically strong, promising opponents that he views as worthy. And despite at times being a victim to his own bloodlust, which we'll touch on later, he is often very strategic and patient when it comes to planning these things out. He has a point system for evaluating potential combatants and keeping track of them. He weighs options in his head of what potential actions will bring him the most optimal scenarios, and overall he is far from incapable of biding his time in service of his ultimate goal. He loves allowing potential partners to grow and flourish to optimal strength while relishing in the prospect of fighting them at maturity. And all in all, I view Hisoka as a dark and twisted demonstration of the main detours theme due to how much promise he sees in the potential fights he spontaneously encounters. He has an overall goal, but that goal can be conflated with the little adventures that he has along the way, and it's all totally cohesive. So I've always thought of him as a great demonstrator of that detours theme as expressed by Jing, until recent events, but we'll get into that later. With his goal in mind, Hisoka grasps the future, spits on fate and defies it, molds the world to his ends, and displays this unerring perseverance and determined human spirit throughout the story, with Chrollo particularly finding him contrasting and deeply interesting in how he attempts to defy the fate that he believes is set. And there is tons of complexity and other bits of flavor and dynamics here, including the amazing mechanical utility that Togashi gets out of Hisoka that I've talked about in the past, but by and large, this was the image of the character that we had. He was amazing, one of the best in the story, but he was relatively simple, feeling like he was defined by pure hedonism, self-indulgence, a total disinterest in his own past by himself and the narrative, and a quirky flexibility and simplicity in his design. But Chapter 405 has since come and gone and totally changed Hisoka and his complexion into something a bit more sad, lonely, and intimate. And at this point, I think we're staring down the barrel of a genuinely existential Hisoka character arc. Now, will this mean that the whole character will completely change significantly and become different from the Hisoka we know? I highly doubt it, but I do think that there has been and will continue to be a shift in his mentality and role, and I do think that he has already changed the landscape of the series a bit. As stated in the page that has invaded my mind and rotted my brain for months and months, in a rare moment of introspection about his current situation and his overall philosophy, Hisoka ponders. When I heard about exterminating the ants, it didn't turn me on because they were ants. The tremendous rumbling I felt a number of times here, finding out it was a group ability made possible through the support of a Nen beast created with the power of a ceremony, it really turned me off. See, I'm normal. I'm not interested in bestiality or an orgy. I can't get aroused. I'm just a guy who wants to be with someone one-on-one, so we can love each other to death. Sad, but oh well. There's always solitaire. This is a solo game that he plays. The confirmation of why we never saw him in the NGL. The image of him dancing with a broken toy of an opponent, one that he broke himself to be clear. His disinterest with the Succession War. This is a defining monologue from Hisoka, one that offers insight into him that we've never had in the series from the very man himself, one that offers context to his actions previously unknown and adds new layers of ambiguity. He's not into chimera ant wars, orgies, or grand epic ceremonies. He prefers something simple, human, one-on-one, and intimate. And significantly, he defines and views the things that he does throughout the story, his bloody fights, as love, an expression of love between two people loving each other to death, and that is key. So if we follow his own thoughts, his acts are not just about him getting off. They aren't purely instinctual, mindless acts of carnality with the broad condition of his fight partners needing to be worthy, fully functional toys. No, Hisoka needs these to be one-on-one, and he views combat as love between two people. His fight with Chrollo was love. With Gon, love. And as opposed to those past situations of raw human expression, he laments that the situation on board the Black Whale doesn't allow him the ability to express this love. And so he sighs and says that there's always solitaire, exhibiting genuine feelings of loneliness and solitude. Many tend to laugh at this line and view it as an innuendo about pleasuring himself, and it very likely could mean that as well. But I think the overall resonance and meaning of this line is much more serious and sad than that. He yearns to reach the heights of love and seems to form bonds through these dances where combatants love and battle each other to the death. This is what he views as his greatest purpose in life, to reach that high, but the emphasis on his partner's pleasure and love too is interesting. Even if they may not be outwardly willing, Hisoka seems to think that this is fulfilling for them too. Most of the characters that he's marked for himself would follow that pattern, enjoying combat, early Gon, Chrollo, even if he didn't display that during their fight, combatants of Heaven's Arena, Netsudo, you'd imagine Illumi. It's skewed, it's insane, and they surely wouldn't all be happy dying in bloody ecstasy like Hisoka, but what's important is that this confirms that Hisoka's fixation isn't pure, mindless instinct. It is hedonism and selfishness, but there is more to it. He views it as genuine love, and it isn't one-sided. It feels to me for the first time in the story that Hisoka's bouts are his means of connection with other people, and that's why he isn't just happy with fighting any strong creature, or in a bloody orgy or a war. He wants intimacy with humans, and his inability to find it makes him lonely sometimes. It's a bit interesting because this sequence shows him dancing with a broken toy, which dehumanizes his opponent. But he also draws attention to a specific interest in humans, so he doesn't seem to view them as less than humans. They're still his toys, but they have humanity and agency. And they're an active part of this in receiving Hisoka's love and intimacy and expressing their own. Add this to the way that his bloodlust takes hold of him at points, the off-the-wall behavior that he displays, etc., and I think it adds all the Hisoka-isms that we've come to know to what is actually a much more profound concept than we initially gave Hisoka's fights credit for. In addition to this, I've kind of touched on it already, but there's a huge significance to the overall demeanor that we see from Hisoka here, especially in contrast to the cold and demonic presence that we see from him when he kills Shalnark and Kortapi. The two scenes almost feel outwardly like two entirely different characters. Chapter 405 is arguably the least Hisoka we've ever seen Hisoka, and this is the most important element of the scene for providing a different view on the character. Let's step back and set the stage for a second. Hisoka loves fighting, he gives his life for it and dedicates himself to it, and it's clear that he's one of the strongest fighters in the story with a huge amount of belief in his skills. He holds himself up to a standard, and I view it as honesty and part of the requirements for his pleasure rather than arrogance that he doesn't get excited by those far weaker than him. He's not interested in easy wins, he enjoys genuine difficulty in his fights and searches them out under the assumption that while part of the fun of these fights is being at risk of death, he always has a very good chance of winning. And by his standards, he almost always wins. He's never had to ponder the feelings that he'd have about losing and genuinely being confronted with the idea that he was outclassed because it's never come up. But enter his fight with Chrollo, and we see a situation in which Hisoka fought hard, adapted, and evolved, but was ultimately systematically and brutally defeated by the representation of his antithesis in Chrollo, as the latter used the powers taken from his family to win. It was a total loss where he stood very little chance overall due to how Chrollo planned and prepared. A humbling defeat the likes of which he has likely never felt before, or at least in a long time. And Hisoka interestingly responds to this loss like a sore loser. Instead of being aspirational and working to fight and strategize against Chrollo in the way that Chrollo did for him, instead of growing and maturing himself and evolving to get stronger, he vows to destroy Chrollo from the inside out and literally tear apart his identity, his strength, and his reason for living. The Spider. Hisoka shows an uncharacteristic disinterest in close bouts here, and instead leans into genuine symbolic slaughter to hit Chrollo in his heart, now having come to intimately understand what the spider represents to Chrollo through their fight. This is raw and thrilling and awesome, but this also indicates a change in Hisoka, very likely spurred on by his deeply rooted, disturbing feelings of powerlessness and vulnerability at his loss. A strange and disturbing feeling that he has rarely, if ever, felt before. He is able to flaunt his crusade and taunt and appear to be in power, but I believe the basis of his actions is very likely a desire to escape the feelings of inadequacy and weakness that he must have felt in response to his loss. It was unfamiliar and bizarre for this man who was always in such control to be a victim to fate for once. So to reinstate his control, to feel calm once more, he needed to kill and destroy. Because it's a primal urge within him, and because it's a method that provides him with authority. In some ways, it's like a reenactment of his animalistic bloodlust during the Hunter exam. Both times with him being strung along by an impulse to kill to then be in control again. Although the context is naturally totally different. So with Kortepi and Shalnark dead and Chrollo reeling, Hisoka is once again in control, and the immediate urgency is gone with the troop dancing to his tune on the ship and him having no need to immediately destroy them. But there is the feeling of it papering over the cracks a bit, and it has left Hisoka in this reflective state as he ponders his mortality, weakness, sadness, and loneliness. As my friend Andres put it, he tried to texture surprise it all back and mend himself entirely, but maybe there's crease somewhere left in the paper. The core scars never properly go away with texture surprise. They remain and are covered up. So maybe that's the case here. Maybe Hisoka is compensating to cover up the fact that he isn't infallible. This obviously doesn't change him as a person. He's still morally bankrupt and sadistic and awful, but it does add a new complexion and layer to his character to enrich and deepen him. And these aspects, loneliness, intimacy, vulnerability, and love, they all recontextualize his character a bit if we then go back and apply it to a lot of his actions in ways that I've described here. And yet, I think that there's more to this, something that counteracts the idea of him being the thesis for Hunter x Hunter's theme. Now, of course, these are all just ideas, and I'm not super confident in any of them, but they're interesting to muse on, and this one in particular has quite widespread thematic implications and impact. As I said earlier, it was easy to view Hisoka's tendency to organically devise situations to satisfy his urges as a microcosm of the Detours theme. But with this scene, I think a concept is brought forth that now shows a bit of a contrast to that theme. What if part of his aimlessness here, in addition to reflecting on his vulnerability and loneliness, is that Hisoka is simply sad that the fight with Chrollo is over? I think it's fair to say that whilst in the middle of his bouts, Hisoka loses himself in pleasure and love. Perhaps he finds himself, in between those bouts, wishing that they could last forever. He laments here and says that it's sad that he can't find that thrill and love once more, and it's in the direct aftermath of the Chrollo fight. Maybe here, in addition to all else, he finds himself needing the thrill of battle. Not physiologically, but emotionally. Maybe he's feeling contemplative because that fight was such a thrill. Just look at his face in the midst of it. And despite the loss that hurt his pride so much, he had fun, derived pleasure, and now the fight that he anticipated most in his life has ended. But he wants it to last forever, in endless love. It's a high that he constantly pursues, to reach those heights once more. But in between those heights, here there is a hollowness, a disappointment with the mundanity of reality, and a consequent yearning, a loneliness that he feels when he's apart from the intimate dance and connection and love that these fights represent. And with regards to Chrollo specifically, something he had spent so much time and passion building towards is done. A pivotal, exciting phase of his life is now over, and he finds himself feeling melancholy. Before, Hisoka was like a dark representation of the main theme of Detours, conveying the idea of traveling from one joy to the next, with no goal in mind overall except pleasure, following his heart through feel and instinct. But here he shows sadness and loneliness at having reached the end goal and, importantly, not finding fulfillment in seeking something beyond that as Jing does, but feeling both a sadness that those heights constantly elude him and a need for more. He wants to perpetually be in that state, but that in itself is an antithesis to the idea of detours. By nature, they can never be constantly enjoyed forever, and they should never form a dependency. They are meant to be beautiful little distractions that fulfill when they come along, but in and of themselves they are not goals. That defeats the purpose. Yet, Hisoka needs the next detour. He yearns for it, and at times displays an anxiety for it, as well as an emptiness. Loneliness is really such a big part of this. There is always solitaire, but Hisoka approaches that idea with a resigned sigh of familiarity, as if it is a common feeling that he knows all too well and treats as a fallback option. What he gets from fights is an ecstasy and connection and love, and it's clear that he'd be happy to die like that. But in addition to the obvious pleasure, would he want to die like that because he sees nothing better in life for him? No higher highs? Or maybe he'd want to die like that because it means that he would be with someone else, and that's the only way that he would feel affection and togetherness in death. To me, this richly contextualizes little moments throughout the story involving Hisoka's little quirks, such as him asking Machi out. She rejects him, and he isn't bothered in the slightest, and he's okay operating on his own. But I think that he'd prefer companionship. Not all the time, because I do think that an essential part of his character is his isolation, but in instances, which I think also explains part of his tendency to so often partner up with Illumi, along with their engagement and quote-unquote breakup, and how that isolation may actually be part of his loneliness here as well. But that's a whole other can of worms. Hisoka's most important points in his life, the points where he wants to stay forever and constantly revisit, occur when loving someone else by his definition. In short, while Hisoka is hedonistic above all else, just like Chrollo, he takes great value in connecting with other people. In his own way, of course. Everyone has their own way of creating bonds, and Hisoka has his. He's nearly as lonely as Chrollo in a way. It's just that he isn't shrouded in that loneliness and isolation, and genuinely does enjoy it at times. But not always, particularly in moments outside of his love. In this way, he has a sort of emotional parallel with Chrollo, and it's kind of poetic that his desire to love Chrollo and his vengeful killing as a result of his loss made it clearer than ever that Chrollo's identity, which he had been searching for, was defined by his connections. And this in turn caused him and the spider to seek out Hisoka, thereby fulfilling the latter's desires. It's an almost symmetrical connection, and I find it very compelling that Hisoka could in this moment be feeling some of the things that Chrollo expressed earlier in the series. Due to Hisoka examining himself in this way, is he feeling confusion and a discrepancy with how he used to view himself due to this being such a departure from how he always conceptualized himself? In this way, with all of these aspects coming to the fore, is he struggling to understand himself in the same way Chrollo expressed that he felt? Is he being reflective and wondering about his new goals through restating what his life's philosophy has always been? And does that make him ponder why he is reflecting this way? Why he is even thinking deeply about himself compared to before when he never felt the need to, similar to Meruem upon first experiencing personal growth? After feeling completely in tune with himself and knowing exactly what he is, perhaps Hisoka is now confronting the idea that these changes are making him unfamiliar with parts of himself. It's a near-perfect inverse of how Chrollo is being brute-forced into understanding himself through seeing how fervently he needs to avoid loss. Chrollo has all these connections and defines himself through them but could not see this, yet is now understanding that who he is defined by his connections. Whereas Hisoka knew that he was defined by his connections, but upon feeling the loss of one, starts to misunderstand himself and question if his current lot in life is truly fulfilling. The tussle with identity and self-comprehension that these two experience is a true mirror reflection of one another, and it is incredible. We have slowly but surely come to understand Chrollo over time despite him coming into the story as a mysterious blank enigma, and we are now starting to lose track of who we conceptualized Hisoka to be as the story progresses, with him now feeling like a bit of an enigma. Now, how does Hisoka get past this mental block and this strange relationship with his purpose? Well, it's simple to say and difficult to do. To escape this loneliness and sadness, Hisoka has to learn to derive value from being with other people in the mortal plane, without bloodshed. To experience pleasures through different avenues, essentially to refocus himself and view life from a broader perspective, just like Gon has had to rethink his life and seek other avenues after living tunnel-visioned for so long. However, while that is the obvious path, do I actually think that Hisoka will end up doing that? Again, I highly doubt it, and I think going down that route could potentially remove the draw of what makes Hisoka Hisoka. There's a good chance that he never cures himself, or that he resolves his inner melancholy on his own and decides that he needs no one somehow. But simply knowing that he is currently a paradox that desires something that life currently doesn't offer him and that he can't find, that he has this incredibly complicated relationship with his desires, it offers so much additional richness to the character that I adore discussing. Hisoka has been stated to never talk about his past. It's been said that he isn't interested in it and doesn't fixate on past events. But here he is breaking that trend in one way or another. Whether he is hell-bent on vengeance for his total defeat and desires to eviscerate Chrollo in every way, or whether he is pensive and melancholic about a phase of his life having ended, how empty the in-between moments are, and the sadness and loneliness of that, or both, Hisoka seems fixated on the past. He seems to be changing, and he doesn't quite know what to do with that. He has suddenly become incredibly multifaceted, simultaneously defined by a wounded pride and vulnerability and resultant vengeance to wrestle back control, a consequent reflective melancholy at the hollowness of that crusade, a disappointment at his inability to express his love endlessly, and the sum of it all, a self-reflection on how much he's changed now and how he's confronting those feelings. He suffered total defeat, his philosophy lost, and it causes him to reflect on how these fights are defined by connection in addition to hedonism. He is beginning to find himself not properly understanding himself just as Chrollo is being forced to understand himself, in a total journey of parallel mirror reflections. Will he continue to reflect or just repress this and go forth? Will he succeed in his original goal of disposing of the spider? When they inevitably come to blows, what will he feel and say? How will he approach reaching that goal of loving another to death, and how will it reflect on the detours theme? As I've said, I don't necessarily think that this will all change his original goals significantly, but I do think that it adds a layer to the character that goes the distance and makes him somehow even more engaging, dynamic, and enticing than he was prior to this. There is no definitive answer, and it could be none or all of these ideas discussed, but it's so much fun to theorize and think about these things, and that endless potential and unpredictability is appropriately reflective of the man himself. Please feel free to share your interpretations on Hisoka now and going forward, and more than anything, many thanks for watching.